spoke, I asked you about Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. There is now absolutely no question that the Russians meddled in the election in order to undermine confidence in American democracy, to damage the campaign of Hillary Clinton, and to boost Donald Trump. Our intelligence agencies have confirmed this. We also know that there were many contacts and communications between Russian operatives and Trump campaign officials and associates. Now, in order to make sure that this kind of attack never happens again, we need to understand what happened and whether anyone inside the Trump campaign assisted the Russian effort. During your confirmation hearing, I asked you, and I quote, if there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do? That was a simple, straightforward question. What will you do? The implication was, will you recuse yourself? But rather than answer that question, you replied, quote, I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, close quote. That was on January 10th. On February 8th, you were confirmed, and on March 1st, the Washington Post published a story that you met with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, twice during the campaign, once in July on the 18th and once on September 8th. And it was later reported that you met with the Russian ambassador a third time at the Mayflower Hotel in April of 2016. Confronted with these reports, you subtly changed your story. Your answer under oath before this committee was that you, quote, did not have communications with the Russians, period. But on the morning that the story broke, you said, quote, I have not met with any Russians at any time to discuss any political campaign. On Twitter, you said, quote, I never met with any Russian officials to discuss issues of the campaign. So, confronted with the truth, you started to qualify your answer. Later, in a letter you sent to this committee to clarify your testimony and to disclose 2 of your 3 meetings, you wrote, quote, I do not recall any discussions with the Russian ambassador or any other representative of the Russian government regarding the political campaign on these occasions or any other occasions. But this summer, the Washington Post reported that American intelligence agencies intercepted communications between the Russian ambassador and Moscow, in which he described 2 of his conversations with you. The April meeting at the Mayflower Hotel and the July meeting at the Republican National Convention. Citing both former and current U.S. officials, the intercepts reportedly indicate that you had, quote, substantive, unquote, discussions on policy matters important to Moscow. According to officials familiar with Russian intelligence reports, the ambassador was well known for accurately relaying his interactions with U.S. officials back to the Kremlin. Attorney General Sessions, in response to this report, the Justice Department declined to comment on the veracity of the intelligence intercepts, but DOJ did assert that you did, quote, not discuss interference in the election, which is also how you describe your communications to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So again, the goalpost has been moved. First it was, I did not have communications with Russians, which was not true. Then it was, I never met with any Russians to discuss any political campaign, which may or may not be true. Now it's, I did not discuss interference in the campaign, which further narrows your initial blanket denial about meeting with the Russians. since you have qualified your denial to say that you did not, quote, discuss issues of the campaign with Russians, what, in your view, constitutes issues of the campaign?
Well, let me just say this without hesitation, that I conducted no improper discussions with Russians at any time regarding a campaign or any other item facing this country.
Okay, how do you know?
I want to say that first. And that's been the suggestion that you've raised and others, that it was somehow we had conversations that were improper.
May I suggest that...
No, you had a long time, Senator Franken. I'd like to respond. Okay. I think I have a...
well, note that Senator Cruz went 2 minutes over, so I don't want... they're going to cut me off, and so I want to ask you some questions.
No, I don't, Mr. Chairman, I don't have to sit in here and listen to his...
You're the one who testified.
Charges without having a chance to respond. Give me a break.
He's taking right now, and I'll give you that at his time.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Take whatever time.
It was not a simple question, Senator Franken.
I'm sorry?
It was not a simple question. The lead-in to your question was very, very troubling, and I answered to you in a way that I felt was responsive to what you raised in your question. Let me read it to you. You said, CNN has just published a story, meaning that day, while we were in the hearing, that none of us had heard about.
Keep reading.
And I'm telling you this about this news story that's just been published. I'm not expecting you to know whether or not it's true, but CNN just published a story alleging that the intelligence community, that's of the United States of America, provided documents to the president-elect last week that included information that, quote, Russian operatives claimed to have compromising personal and financial information about Mr. Trump. You went on to say these documents also allegedly say, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump's surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government. Now, again, I'm telling you this as it's coming out, so you know, but if it's true, it's obviously extremely serious, and if there's any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do? So taken aback by this dramatic statement that I'd never heard before and knew nothing about, I responded this way. Senator Franken, I'm not aware of those activities. I have been called a surrogate a time or two in this campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians. I'm unable to comment on it. I don't think that can fairly be interpreted as saying I never had conversations with any Russians. It was referring directly to the suggestion that there was a continuing exchange of information between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government, which did not happen, at least not to my knowledge, and not with me. And that's why I responded the way I do. And I'm disappointed. Yes, you can say what you want to about the accuracy of it, but I think it was a good faith response to a dramatic event at the time. And I don't think it's fair for you to suggest otherwise.
Okay, if I give you an additional 3 minutes and then finish.
He took more than 3 minutes.
No, he didn't.
Yeah.
He took about 2.5.
Well, go. No.
How much do you want? I don't want to take a lot of time bargaining with you.
Well, I didn't take as much time as Senator Franken took.
Hey, let me just deal with Senator Franken. 3 more minutes, please.
Okay, first of all, you said I did not have communications with the Russians. This was about ongoing communications. You had 3 communications with Kislyak, and now you can't recall with answering Senator Leahy, you can't recall whether you discussed what you discussed with Kislyak.
What I would
And
say
so-
to you is,
Please.
okay, go ahead. You go make a lot of allegations, Senator. It's hard for me to respond to
I'm
them
not-
in the time I've got.
Can I have a little bit more time? Okay. You said today in response to Senator Leahy that you don't recall whether you talked about the campaign, whether you don't recall whether you talked about issues and Trump's views on issues with Russia. Those are very, very relevant to the campaign, whether a surrogate from the campaign is talking with the Russian ambassador about the candidates' views on Russian policy, especially at the Republican National Convention, at the Mayflower Hotel the day before Trump is going to give his maiden speech on foreign policy. That's very different. Not being able to recall what you discussed with him is very different than saying, I have not had communications with the Russians. The ambassador from Russia is Russian. And how your how your responses morphed from I did not have communications with the Russians to I did not discuss substantive I did not discuss any the political campaign, and then finally going to I did not discuss interference in the election. That to me is moving the goalpost every time. And we're starting off with an extra point, and by the end, we're going to a 75-yard field goal. If it has to be us, saying I didn't discuss interfering with the election is your last statement, that's a very different bar than I can tell you I did not meet with any Russians.
Relatively short answer.
So he gets to do about 10 minutes improperly framing this subject, and I'm given a short chance to respond?
Proceed, please. But then we're going to
You're
call on
spinning,
Senator
first and foremost, Senator Franken, you and I have had a good relationship on this committee. I would tell my colleagues, I think most of you know, I've committed myself to a high level of public service, to reach the highest standards of ethics and decency in my service, to be honest about things that I say. And so you have now gone through this long talk that I believe is totally unfair to me. It all arose from this question. When it was charged that these documents allegedly say, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump's surrogates, as if all of them, Trump's surrogates, and intermediaries for the Russian government. Isn't that what you said? You're shaking your head.
No, don't all Trump surrogates.
It said Trump's surrogates. Didn't say some of. Said his surrogates. And I felt a need to respond. And I responded on the spot. We've been 6 hours in the hearing, the end of the day, and I said, I'm not aware of those activities. And I wasn't, and am not. I don't believe they occurred. I said, I have been called a surrogate a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians. I'm unable to comment on it. I was talking about it as a surrogate in the campaign. I didn't have a continuing series, a continuing exchange of information. So now everything else, so now you take that to say if I ever met with a Russian, I've not been candid with the committee, and I reject that.
Senator Sass.
General, thanks.